I made a pencil with 2 erasers. It was pointless. What's going on, YouTube? So today we are going to be doing a solo class tier list. Now, this is actually the #1 suggested thing to me inside my YouTube content creator app. It says, hey, people are searching for this topic 24/7. So if you're new here, because likely there's a good chance that you're new here, welcome. We open every video with a bit of a pun or a bit of a funny joke, and then we get straight down to business, no lollygag. And so today, we are going to break down each class on how good it is to be a solo player as. Now, some important distinctions here. Just because there are certain broken build combinations with solo classes doesn't necessarily mean it's going to rank the highest. Why is that? Well, let's say that there's a super busted Necromancer build, but it requires trials and hard dungeons to farm. It would be pretty disingenuous to me to recommend something like that when the whole value of these builds is that you can create them and you can adapt with them as you go without having to rely on other players. So that is the mindset that we're going to be taking into this tier list. We are going to be combining Magicka and Stamina versions of those classes because with the new armory system, you can flip-flop between them super easily. So let's jump into it. And I also want to note too that solo doesn't just mean PvE content such as arenas, world bosses, overland content, etc. It can also just as easily be like if you want to queue into Cyrodiil or the Imperial City and go in there on your lonesome. We're going to include all possible types of content as we break this down, and we start with the Dragon Knight. And so the Dragon Knight I'm going to put into the A tier. This is also my segue to break down my tiers. So the S tier to me is it can be good for any type of solo content, whether it's PvP, PvE world bosses, whether it's arenas, whether it's going into any type of content that you could do, such as the Imperial City, such as going into Cyrodiil on your own, etc., etc. A tier is it's really good for most of those, but it might drop off for some of them. And the Dragon Knight is going to be the first example of an A tier. The A tier is great because it's exceptional at doing a lot of things. Dots are notably the best thing that it's good at. You can put a whole bunch of dots on your enemies. It does damage over time to them. It's got great ultimate regen. It's got all sorts of good things that you could ever want for in a class. But I do think that it falls short in certain types of content, and it can be a little bit harder to pilot, especially if you're looking to get into any sort of Imperial cities. I also think in arenas, Dragon Knights can be a little bit more finicky. I think especially when you have DPS checks in arenas, that the Dragon Knight is definitely the one that's a little more tricky to pilot. Versus some of the other classes. So for me, that's why Dragon Knight only goes in A tier, but A tier is still great. Next up is my bread and butter, and it is the Sorcerer. Whether it comes to Magicka Sorcerer, Stamina Sorcerer, you can pretty effectively use it for anything. You want to go to the Imperial City and have tons of mobility to not get killed and farm Telvar? Be a Sorcerer. You want to have easy cheese on being able to get through the final stage of Vatestrand without having to fail the DPS check? Sorcerer. You want a nice class that has things like executes, easy access to spammables, damage shields, pets that'll just give you free DPS? Sorcerer. To me, the Sorcerer is the ultimate solo class in the Elder Scrolls Online. I highly suggest it, and I have no problem putting it in the S tier, even if it is my most played class, and there might be some slight bias. Next, we have the Nightblade, and to me, the Nightblade is kind of like the Sorcerer Light. It's got good access to things like executes and sustain. It's got decent mobility, but it really does struggle in quite a bit of different types of content, especially if you're trying to do more PvE solo-esque things. I think that it can be a little bit more finicky to go with. I do think that it's probably on par with the Dragon Knight. I think more of your struggles are going to come inside of your solo arenas. Infinite Archive, I think, is going to be much more difficult for a Nightblade than things such as a Sorcerer. So for me, I would put it comfortably in the A tier. Where it definitely shines, though, the Nightblade is especially if you're trying to get into things such as thieving, if you want classes with great mobility, great damage burst options, if you like to be a solo player, especially more so in PvP, Nightblades definitely stand out. But they do have their weaknesses, and to me, that's definitely going to be in your arenas, and they can be pretty hard to pilot, especially if you're in any sort of DPS check for a solo arena. The Nightblade might be a little bit more tricky for you, so it'll just depend on the type of content that you're doing, but still firmly in the A tier. Next up is the Warden, which does pain me slightly because I used to main a Warden character when I came to Xbox. And unfortunately, it's our first example of a B tier class. Now, what is a B tier class? Well, instead of excelling or being commendable in all categories of content, it's just above average. So it's not bad at any type of content, I would say, but it certainly doesn't excel at anything. Could you take a Warden into the Imperial City? Yeah. Could you take him into Cyrodiil on your own? Sure. Could you fight world bosses with him? Yeah. Could you do arenas with him? Yeah, you might struggle a little bit for some of them, but overall, he's got decent tools to equip to deal with everything. So I would say that's your generic above average class. It doesn't suffer from anything that's going to be debilitating. There's really no type of content that it can't do, but it's not going to excel really in any of those types of content where everything above it definitely does have some things that it excels at. And to me, that's why the Warden is going to drop down to the B tier. Next up, the Necromancer is going into the D tier. Now, we haven't explained the C tier yet, so let's quickly explain what the C tier is, since there won't be any classes in it. That's just an average class that averagely excels at that type of content. D tier is it's actually debilitating to be part of that class. So you're actually making it harder to be a solo player by picking this class, and to me, the Necromancer fits into there. The Necromancer is exceptionally hard to pilot, and all of the bonuses that you get from being a Necromancer, all of the skill checks that you have to go through, really only benefit group play, because all of the bonuses and buffs that you get by piloting a Necromancer well really only benefit you when you're with other players, in my opinion, versus these other classes. So to me, the Necromancer goes in the D tier. If somebody said, I want to be a solo player and be able to do everything independently, and I'm going to pick a Necromancer, I would say, ooh, have you thought about anything else? Or are you going to get into more trials, group content, maybe go into tanking, off-tanking with this Necromancer? No, you just want to be a solo player or do solo stuff with them? I'd say, maybe steer clear of that. Because every bonus that the Necromancer get, and all of the buffs and debuffs that it does, really only start to stack when you're in group content, so it's going in the D tier. Next up, we have the Templar. It's going in the S tier. If you know anything about the Elder Scrolls Online before watching this video, you knew that it probably would be, and that is because that the Templar is the jack of all trades. Now, just because you're a jack of all trades doesn't mean that you're not, the best of the best at certain things. And the Templar is a perfect example of that. The hardest arena, in my opinion, Vatestrand, can be completed with the Templar by only pressing 2 buttons the entire time. There is a YouTube video where you just need to go and press 2 buttons to complete the hardest arena with this Templar. Now, the Templar might not be the best of the best in all types of content. For example, if you're in the Imperial City, a Templar is certainly a great choice, but I don't think it's necessarily the best choice for you. But overland farming, when it comes to solo content like those arenas, the Templar can definitely hold its own. It's user-friendly, and it doesn't require ridiculously OP sets. The sets that a Templar is using, you can purchase from other players relatively cheaply, because a lot of them come from things like Alliance points, which are always flooded on the market because everybody's got millions of them. Templar is a great choice if you're new to the Elder Scrolls Online, and I can highly suggest that you pick that as your first class. And finally, we have the Arcanist, which a lot of people think would be an easy S tier, but I'm actually going to put it down in the A tier. The Arcanist does have great DPS burst damage, it's got easy spammable skills, it's got great access to defensive-minded skills as well, but to me, it falls short in just a few aspects, and notably being that the Arcanist has been notably whittled down, and it continues to get nerfed. I also think, too, that the Arcanist is not necessarily as good for that solo type of PvP content. I think if you're going into the Imperial City, it's definitely not mobile enough in its abilities and its skills, whereas I think even like a Dragon Knight or a Nightblade would be significantly better, especially as a new player, especially as a solo player. So to me, that's where it loses a few points, and I really wanted to try to reserve the S tier for that creme de la creme of classes when it comes to my new solo player suggestions. And so that's how this tier list is actually going to be rounded off. I know this is going to be very controversial because every tier list is, and I'm curious as to where you guys would put these. What would be your S tier? What would be your A tier? and what would be your B, C, and D tier if you do have any. And obviously, it's very dependent on the type of content that you're doing. If this was a PvP only tier list, this would be a vastly different tier list. If this was a Trials and Dungeons list, this would be a very different tier list. So if you're interested in more tier lists and more of a breakdown for each one, because, fun fact, what we are going to be doing now is for every single class on here, we are going to be doing a solo build for them. So this is my segue into doing that type of content because you guys requested it. So this is the first piece in that puzzle. So stay tuned for our solo Sorcerer build, followed by our Templar, Dragon Knight, Nightblade, Arcanist, Warden, and then Necromancer. So thank you guys so much again for watching. And as always, we're doing our 3 giveaway drawings. All you need to do to enter is be subscribed. Just by being subscribed, you are entered. But if you want 2 additional entries, we also pull from Twitch and Twitter, so drop a follow on those 2 platforms. Second thing is just leave a comment in the comments below. Boost the algorithm. Don't get your comment removed for spam, and you will be entered. And then the third thing is just look for a hidden word to be flashed upon the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. Thank you guys so much again for watching. If there's any other tier lists or things that you can think of that you want to see in the future, let me know. We're going to start our solo player build series, and we'll see how that goes, and I'll catch you there. Bye, guys.
You better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.